How to Take Interesting Photographs by Cody Allred. Just because you don't have a professional camera does not mean you can't take professional quality photos. Understanding the basics and how to take a good photograph can help immensely in improving your quality of photograph. I hope that this slidecast will show you how to do just that. Whether you are interested in taking images for social media or for personal use, these techniques can help you create a much more interesting looking image. All you'll need for this project is a working camera. Either a professional camera or a phone camera will work just fine. In this slidecast, I've included all my own works to show how I use each of the techniques I will show you. The first step in taking a good photograph is learning the basics of your camera. Understanding how your settings work together to create an image is incredibly important. All photographers should know how to do this. On any camera, as well as most phone cameras, they include a list of settings that you can use for images. These include portrait, child, sport, macro, and more. For most photographs, I recommend using auto. This is because the camera will do most of the work in taking the image and setting up the shot. The camera will choose the best settings and lighting, as well as focus for the photo you want to take. The only exception to this rule would be sports mode. If you're taking a photo of sports, you want your camera to be taking a photo as quickly as possible to minimize the blur. Now that you have your camera ready, there are many different ways to take an interesting image. These techniques all revolve around the photographer getting into weird and crazy positions, and revolve around the photographer's positioning from the subject. This is one of my favorite parts of being a photographer, seeing how a crazy and weird shot can make a beautiful and stunning image. The first technique is getting on the ground. I would recommend this photograph and position for macro shots of flowers, animals sitting in the grass, and even landscape views. This allows for the photographer to get an eye level with the subject and creates a much more moving and emotional image. However, you do not want to take this with portraits using this setting because unless you're an eye level with your subject, it can create a distorted image, making the subject or the person look much more larger than they actually are. This type of photography is called ground view or low angle photography, and if used correctly, it can create an incredibly moving image. As you can see, some of the images I've taken with this include the iconic Hello Walk, where I got on the ground to take an image of the sidewalk looking up at the trees. You can also see an image where I took a picture of a dog getting on eye level, creating a much more emotional image, and another landscape shot laying in the grass to get an upward view up at the mountains. Another type of photography is aerial view or high angle view photography. This is the idea that you're getting above your subject at a higher angle. For this technique, I would highly recommend taking photos of subjects, of people, and portraits. This type of photo gives a feeling of empowerment and creates a much more interesting image than a straight shot would. You can also take photos of food with this type of photography, as it will give a clear shot and a wide view of everything on the plate. As you can see, I've taken countless images using this type of photography. One, I collected all my favorite things and created an aerial shot of that. Another, like I said, I took a photo of food. And this type of photography just creates an interesting image, even if it's something boring like your feet on the ground with the fall leaves. It definitely creates a much more emotional and interesting type of image. Next, framing. Framing is a technique where the photographer uses element from a scene to frame their photograph. I absolutely love this type of photography. You're using parts of nature, parts of the area that you're at, and looking and being able to think quickly and notice these types of things that can frame your image is incredibly important part of being a photographer. This type of photography draws the viewer's eye into the area of focus. I personally love this type of photography, as I said before, and some of my favorite shots were taken with this technique. Some of the shots, as shown, is one of a bride looking at herself in the mirror, and this is an interesting framed image because it's not like a typical frame. The frame in this case is a mirror. You'll also see that one of them I took is of the beach through a window, and another, it's more of a typical frame as you'd see it. One technique that is particularly important to understand, possibly one of the most important rules to understand, is the rule of thirds. This technique is something that every photographer should learn, especially if you're a beginning photographer. If you don't want to use any of the previous techniques, this technique is a surefire way to create an interesting image. The rule works by creating a grid, like the one shown below, and placing the most important part of the photograph in the third grid line to the far left or right of your image. This creates a much more interesting image than it would if you took a straight-on shot of a subject. As you'll see in the images I took, they're all people in a landscape situation with a wide view of the landscape shot, but the person's in the left or right corner. This creates a different type of balance in the image, a much more interesting image than a straight-on shot could. The final step to making a photo more interesting is to simply start thinking about your photography more artistically. And I know this seems easier said than done, and trust me, it is. But it happens with time. Anyone can take photos, so being able to look at a photograph and think of different ways you can make it more interesting is bound to make your images look more professional and more beautiful. And I hope that you can combine all the techniques you learned today to make your images, whether for social media, family, friends, or personal use, more interesting. Thank you for listening.